Welcome everybody to this wonderful webinar. We're just going to wait a minute or two as people join, and we're delighted that you're all joining us. So just give us a minute or two to let people join online. I can see people entering the room as they join us. So we're really happy that you're all coming online now. Okay, I would really like to welcome you to the Sexual Violence Research Initiative and the Equality Insights Lab webinar to launch the new guide, the IPV Adapt Plus Framework, How to Adapt Intimate Partner Violence Prevention Programs. This guidance has been an incredible journey to develop, and we're so excited to be sharing it with you today. And it's been designed to support a variety of stakeholders to adapt intimate partner violence prevention programs for different populations and contexts, and includes a step-by-step flexible process, tools, and case examples. And although I'm biased, it's an incredible tool for the field. I'm Elizabeth Dartnell, the Executive Director of the Sexual Violence Research Initiative. Next slide, please, Norma. But first, before I share today's agenda with you, some housekeeping. We are together for an hour or maybe just a little bit over. We're using Zoom and the event is being recorded. So for those of you who have joined us online, please introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you are in the world. And to let you know that the recording will be shared with you all via email and will be uploaded to the Sexual Violence Research Initiative website, and we'll share the link with you after the event. We are also really delighted to say that we do have Spanish, French, and Arabic interpretation available. To access the interpretation service, go to the bottom of your screen and click on the globe icon and select the language of your choice. And then press mute original language. That will clear any background noise from the presenters on the floor so that you can only hear the interpreter. Okay, now to the agenda. Next slide, please, Morma. We have an incredibly packed agenda today, filled with a lineup of exceptional speakers, of course, to share with you their adaptation wisdom. First up, we have Lisa Mossberg, who's going to set us the scene around our discussion by sharing some opening remarks on IPV prevention programs and why systematic adaptation processes are really important. This is going to be followed by a presentation by Dr. Vandana Sharma, who is based at the Harvard School of Public Health and the Equality Insights Lab. Vandana is going to introduce the new guide in more detail and is a researcher with over 15 years of experience on GBV prevention programming and evaluation in multiple contexts. We're going to follow this presentation with a panel discussion, which includes Laura Samogi, Clara Alaman, Nasnet Jebara, and Diana Arango, who I will introduce in a little bit. And following the panel discussion, we'll wrap up and discuss the next steps. If you have any questions at all during the event, please do write them in the chat or email us later after the event. Now, first, I have the great honor of introducing our first speaker, Lisa Mossberg. Lisa is the coordinator of the Swedish Global Strategy on Gender Equality at CEDAW. Lisa is a political scientist by training and has spent 25 years in development cooperation, so comes to us with an immense amount of experience in development. And since 2018, Lisa has been coordinating CEDAW's implementation of the Swedish strategy for gender equality and women's rights and girls' rights. Thank you, Lisa. Now over to you for some opening and welcoming remarks.
Now you hear me, right? Thank you so much, Liz. It's an honor to be here to open this seminar. And here are some short remarks. Intimate partner violence, and all forms of violence against women are a result of inequality and unequal power relations. We know that. And we do know that it's a hindrance for women and girls' human rights, as well as for democratic development and sustainable development. Intimate partner violence is the most common form of violence against women. And we do know that with 30% of women globally experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. So, over the past 2 decades, a growing number of interventions to prevent and reduce IPV have been rigorously evaluated in many different contexts. These interventions feature a range of science-based social norm change strategies that work across the levels of the socio-ecological model of violence, which recognizes that multiple factors operate at various levels: individual, relationship, community, and society, and influence the risk for intimate partner violence. And as program implementers, researchers, and donors become increasingly interested in adapting these proven and tested IPV prevention interventions to new contexts or to new populations, there is a need for guidance and tools to facilitate and strengthen this process. We all need to do our best. And while there are several adoption guides available for health promotion and behavioral health intervention, there has been a limited guidance on adapting more complex health programs, such as IPV prevention programs, or that are tailored for development and humanitarian contexts. So, to address the need for guidance on adaptation of IPV prevention programs, a collaborative initiative led by Equality Insights Lab and SVRI was launched to assess the existing evidence on IPV prevention program adoption, synthesize learning across adaptations, and to develop guidance to support stakeholders in the process, measurement, and monitoring and evaluation of the adaptation of IPV prevention programs. And now, after 3 years, we are here, and I'm delighted to be part of this launch of the guidance, the IPV Adapt Plus framework, how to adapt intimate partner violence prevention programs. I hope that we will all use the guidance that will help us make sure we are relevant and effective and prevent ineffective use of resources and adaptations that might not be successful, so that we can avoid unintended consequences. So please, let's listen and learn together and make sure to use this very relevant tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for those really wonderful opening remarks, reminding us that we have this incredible tool that took 3 years to in the making to bring it to you today, and that it is really important that we use these guidances to ensure that we do systematic, careful adaptation to ensure we do no harm. So thank you. I have the real honor also just to present a very short video on the guide to give you some overall kind of like brief highlights before Vandana speaks in more detail about the guide. So over to you, Morma, to share us the video.
Globally, intimate partner violence is one of the most common forms of violence against women. Around the world, 30% of women experience physical and/or sexual violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. Such violence is preventable. A growing evidence base shows that well-designed programs that target the root causes of violence can prevent intimate partner violence. Program staff, policymakers, and organizations are beginning to adapt these proven and tested programs to other new and diverse contexts and populations. But what are the best ways to adapt these effective IPV prevention programs for new settings? The process of adaptation is challenging. unsystematic adaptations not only risk poor results, but could cause harm. Programs must be modified to improve fit for new contexts, while keeping the core components that are responsible for their effectiveness. Introducing the IPV Adapt Plus framework, Equality Insights Lab, and the Sexual Violence Research Initiative have developed a comprehensive guide for researchers, practitioners, activists, and others on how to effectively adapt IPV prevention programs for use in new contexts. The IPV Adapt Plus framework is an ethical and evidence-based adaptation guide that describes a systematic, step-by-step process for adapting IPV prevention programs, integrates a participatory, women-centered approach that includes learning-oriented monitoring and evaluation, provides tools for use during the adaptation process, and includes case examples to illustrate learning from previous IPV program adaptations. The guide includes 15 steps across 5 stages. The overall approach is flexible and recognizes that the adaptation process may look very different for different adaptations. The use of this guide will promote better use of scarce resources, strengthen adaptation processes, and contribute to building better IPV prevention programs.
Thank you very much, Morma, for that wonderful video. And now I'm going to hand it over to Vandana. But before doing so, I just want to remind you that video is available for all of you to use so you can share and disseminate the guidance. So please download it from our website. Over to you, Vandana, to tell us more about the guide.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I am really excited to be part of this launch after, as you've heard, 3 years of collaboration to arrive at this point. Let me just make sure that I'm able to move the slides here. Great. And so you've already heard, about this process and about the guide briefly, but I wanted to acknowledge all of the people that have worked on this together over the last years. So in addition to myself, Dr. Jennifer Scott, Catherine Bellin, Liz Dartnell, Dr. Ani Gevers, and there was also a 14-member advisory board that contributed along the way. And as we embarked on the process, we conducted a really thorough literature review. We consulted with key experts, and we reviewed information and data and articles related to different program adaptations. And for the purposes of this guide, arrived at the definition of adaptation that you see here on the screen. So by adaptation, we're referring to the deliberate and planned process of modifying the content, delivery, or implementation of a program in order to optimize its fit for a different context or population. Now, this process should uphold the original program's core components in order to achieve the intended impact. And by core components, here we refer to features that fundamentally define the program and are responsible for the desired effects. Some other concepts that are highlighted in the guide include fit and fidelity. And so by fidelity, here we are referring to the degree to which the program is implemented as intended by the original developers, whereas fit refers to how closely the program is tailored to a particular context. Often we have in the past discussed fit and fidelity on a continuum where increasing one reduces the other, but in reality, that relationship is actually much more complex and it's not a straight continuum. So I think the goal of program adaptations should really be to increase fit for the particular context and at the same time maintaining fidelity to the original program. So those are discussed in more detail in the guidance. And then another area that we highlight is the different types of adaptations that are possible. There can be adaptations for a new population or context, but there can also be adaptations to a new modality. For example, one of the programs I've worked on, Unite for a Better Life, was adapted for a humanitarian context, and it's an in-person program delivered to groups of men, women, and couples. But there was a subsequent adaptation which changed the modality of delivery from in-person to podcast-based. And that was for the same population. There can also be adaptations from non-humanitarian to humanitarian contexts, adaptations as part of scale up, and adaptations to address new issues. And some of the good practices that are highlighted throughout the guide are described here. So ensuring that modifications are fidelity consistent. So modifications that compromise fidelity may reduce effectiveness of the program. Adaptations that use a systematic process, and that includes consulting data, stakeholders, theory, or other approaches, may be more likely to adhere to a program's core components, and this will likely contribute to success. And then proactive or planned adaptations, those that are made in response to an anticipated obstacle, change, or difference in context tend to be more effective. Reactive or unplanned modifications are sometimes unavoidable, but if those are done in a systematic way too, they may not threaten fidelity. And then just to highlight, ineffective modifications often occur in the context of limited available resources and or time, or when modifications have been unplanned or unsystematic. That said, there still is a limited research, and I think more research could be helpful for us going forward as a field in order for us to better understand how different types of adaptations influence program outcomes. Now, getting into the IPV Adapt Plus framework. So it comprises 5 stages and 15 steps. You've already heard some of this background information here, but just to highlight, the literature review included over 165 articles and reports, and we had 20 key informant interviews and then input from key experts that went into this process. So IPV in the framework title stands for intimate partner violence, but it also has a second meaning. It refers to intentional, planned, and validated. And that's because this approach that we're presenting in the guide outlines a deliberate and planned process to facilitate IPV program adaptation. And it really seeks to avoid those unintentional deviations and on-the-fly adaptations. The process is systematic, and it also has these validation checkpoints that are integrated throughout. Now, the plus refers to 3 different core components of this framework. So the inclusion of ethical principles, community-based, participatory, and women-centered approaches, and learning-oriented monitoring and evaluation. Now, while the approach is laid out in 5 stages and 15 steps and sort of presented in a linear way, we do take this approach that adaptations are not always linear. And so there's sort of this flexibility that's built in, you'll see as you look at the guidance. So this slide here shows the overall framework. So each stage is laid out across the different columns, and the acronym ADAPT refers to each of the 5 stages. So stage 1 is A, and it's for assessing the context and selecting a suitable IPV prevention program to adapt for your context. And under that stage 1, there are 3 different steps that are described there. So assessing the community context and IPV risk factors in that context, selecting the program to adapt, and consulting stakeholders and establishing partnerships. Stage 2, demarcated by the D in the ADAPT acronym, stands for designing your IPV program adaptation approach. And that includes 3 stages. So reviewing the core components of the program, refining the theory of change, and identifying the specific adaptations that are needed, and developing the approach for undertaking those adaptations. Stage 3 is another A, and that is for adapting the IPV program. So actually conducting the modifications. And so there are 3 steps here. So modifying the program components according to the approach laid out previously, and maintaining the fidelity and fit, obtaining feedback on the adapted materials and approach, and documenting the adaptation process and capturing learning. Stage 4 is piloting and refining the adapted IPV program. And stage 5 is your targeted implementation and evaluation. And there are additional steps under each of those. Now, I mentioned those core principles. So participatory community and women-centered approach is integrated throughout the process to ensure acceptability, sustainability of the adapted program, culturally appropriate content, and also ensuring that voices of women are front and center throughout the process. And there are also some considerations for integrating an equity lens throughout the guide. The ethical and evidence-based part of this is also emphasized throughout. The guide takes the position that the adaptation process and implementation of the adapted program should not cause harm to women, community members, or partners, and that safeguarding mechanisms should be in place to monitor and mitigate risks. The framework also emphasizes that adapting IPV programs that have demonstrated effectiveness should be prioritized. And then the learning-oriented M&E component is also critically important. So ensuring that the process is documented, that the process is monitored, and that effects are measured. And here we mean both intended and unintended effects of the adapted program during piloting and program implementation. Now, the guide also includes a theory of change, which is presented here. I won't go into this in detail, but I wanted to just mention that the theory of change presents both outcomes related to the adaptation process itself, but also outcomes related to implementation of the adapted program. And then the guide also takes into account funding timelines and how availability of resources can affect the process. And so this example here is a diagram showing sort of key funding time points in relation to the steps in the framework. And then kind of to wrap up, I wanted to also mention that we've developed several tools and case examples to really ensure that the guide is practical and field friendly and can be used by those on the ground who are conducting these adaptations. So one example of a tool is a modification matrix, and it's included in the guide. There's a fully completed example version so that readers can see how to complete it. And it's basically a tool that can be used during the adaptation process to actually document what changes were being made, whether those changes are fidelity consistent or not, and the decision making around the change and who is involved in the decision. And so there are a couple of other tools as well. And then here we see this is an example of one of the case examples that we have. These focus on specific adaptations of IPV prevention programs and draw out key learning around those adaptations. So the one presented here is the adaptation of Unite for a Better Life, which was originally designed for a non-humanitarian rural Ethiopian population, and it was adapted for a Somali refugee context. And so some of the key learnings around that process are included. And so with that, I will pass it back to Liz to for us to move on into the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana, for being able to succinctly present quite a rigorous and thoughtful process that the presentation reminded me how much work and thought has gone into the development of this guide. So please, we encourage you all to dig deep into this guide and really use it, because I think it's going to be a really helpful, systematic way of thinking through adaptation. And we really want to be scaling up and scaling out in different ways the interventions that have been developed. And this is a one tool to really help you do that. And I do hope that the panelists and the experts in this room and everybody on the call will also be sharing resources that you have so we can start developing a compendium of the different tools that are out there. However, you're not here to listen to me at all. What we want is to really hear from this incredible group of wonderful panelists that we have, who are going to share with us some of the wealth of experiences and expertise that they have on adaptation. We have with us Laura, who is the CEO, the co-CEO of Womanity. Womanity is a Swiss-based organization that supports initiatives to advance women's rights. Laura is a feminist, a migrant, an accomplished international development professional, and a really strong believer on the power of equitable partnerships to decolonize development. Welcome, Laura. We also have Clara, who is the Director of Programs at Equimundo, formerly known as Promundo US. Clara is a gender specialist with almost 20 years of experience in social science research, program design, program development and evaluation to advance gender equality and to prevent violence. Again, Clara, thank you for joining us. We also have Natsnet, who works as the Director for the Violence Against Women Prevention team at Raising Voices. Natsnet supports her Raising Voices team in their violence against women prevention efforts and has been involved in this field since 2001 and has immense experience in scaling up and adaptation of intervention and prevention programs on violence against women. Thank you, Natsnet, for being with us today. And then Diana. Diana is the GBV Prevention and Response Coordinator for the Latin America and the Caribbean for the Gender Group at the World Bank. And Diana, I know because I've been working with Diana for many years, has, during her tenure at the World Bank, has led the bank in changing its approach to integrating GBV into operations across all of the World Bank sectors. So hurrah to this incredible, wonderful panel. And it's a real honor for me to be moderating this discussion with you. So first, I want to ask you all the same question and get your reflections on this. As Vandana spoke about, the IPV Adapt Plus framework highlights so many good practices for adapting IPV prevention programs, from ensuring that we have the adequate resources, that we allocate sufficient budget and time, to ensuring that the core components of the original program are not modified. From your experiences with IPV prevention program adaptation, would you mind just sharing with us some one or two good examples of practices for conducting effective and ethical adaptation? I'm going to first turn to Natsnet. Could you share with us some of your thoughts on this question?
Thank you, Liz. It's such an honor to be part of this conversation. And congratulations to you and the team who've been working tirelessly for the past 3 years to produce this beautiful adaptation guide. So, yeah, I would be making reference to our experience in guiding and supporting SASA adaptation that really includes and brings rich experience from over 50 countries, both in humanitarian and development settings. I say it's quite a continuous learning. We don't really feel like we have got our heads around it, but I would like to highlight a couple of experiences that are worth considering when we think about adaptations. One, speaking to the plus plus in the guide is that participatory and inclusive adaptation process. In most adaptation efforts, we have seen partners establishing a committee, adaptation committee, that really inform the process from conceptualizing, designing, all the way to completion, including reviews and piloting. And this is quite inclusive because it has diverse representation, like program staff, community members, like community activists or any community member, but we also make sure that there is representation from female and male groups. And when it is an adaptation for a cultural context, we also advise and bring cultural experts. And this engagement is really critical. We have seen it practically in the adaptation of SASA to Latin and Central America context, where we had really strong collaboration with the funder Vista Hermosa, and then indigenous women rights and activist organization. And we were really privileged to be supported for a year plus, so we can have clarity and space to think through it. So that is really something that ensures effective and appropriate adaptation process that ensures safety. Another one is looking at practice-based learning. It's like a continuous learning, documenting to create tools to support and guide adaptation. So we have quite a number of tools and guides that really inform upcoming adaptation process. For example, we have SASA dictionary for those who really need to translate. So this is a list of key concepts that needs careful consideration, deliberation, and consultative translation to ensure the spirit and meaning is maintained through the adaptation. Another tool is worksheet that we share with partners to really design the process, and then use that worksheet also to monitor progress of the adaptation. We have a whole adaptation brief that unpacks the different types of SASA adaptation, as well as the steps and then tips on how to effectively adapt. But finally, I also want to mention, we know finding resource for adaptation is not easy. So what we do is create a repository of adapted materials. So organizations who want to use it in a similar context, they don't have to start from scratch. They can pick it from there. I will pause here and pass the mic back to you, Liz.
Natsnet, thank you so much for reminding us the importance of time to making sure adaptation is done well and thoughtfully and does no harm. And please, would you not mind sharing all these incredible resources that Raising Voices has created? And also just to remind everybody who may not know that Raising Voices is part of a community of upscaling prevention programs called CUSP, and they have some incredible resources as well. And we will also share them in the chat. Now, I'd like to turn to you, Laura, to talk about your experiences of IPV prevention program adaptation and some examples that you'd like to share with us. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Liz. I want to echo Natsnet and say big congratulations for the launch. I was in the workshop where Vandana started to share the previous SGRI, and it was really powerful to see a lot of the intuitive work happening being captured in a way that it's so easy to understand. So it's really, really helpful. So at Humanity, we have been supporting organizations that are adapting programs on prevention of violence across countries in the Global South since 2014. So I've seen lots of different programs being adapted to lots of different contexts. It's not like SASA, SASA has done one program and adapted the program and moving to lots of different contexts for us. They are very different programs. looking at different elements of prevention as well. And I think that one thing that I see, which is important and was important across all the different examples we have seen over the years, is the power balance between the organizations that are working together on the adaptation. In our case, normally there were 2 or maybe 3 organizations working together. And I think there is a big risk when the organization that they have developed the program or the intervention to come as the one who has the knowledge, and that organization in the country where the program will be adapted is the kind of the implementer. When we saw things like that happening, we understood that there was a big challenge there. I think it's very important when the partners see each other as bringing equal value and equal knowledge, because one, yes, has a lot of understanding of the program, but the other one has a lot of understanding of the context and the stakeholders and the community and who should be involved. And without those 2, the program adaptation probably won't be successful. So I think it's critical. And it doesn't mean that the power is balanced during the whole process. Depending on the phase you are, the power might shift because of the needs. So in the beginning, when the country on the organization, the country the program be adapted needs to learn more about the program, maybe the originator will be exercising more power because they have that knowledge. But on the adaptation phase, when the local context and local community need to be involved, then it's critical that the organization in the local context is heard, right? And their knowledge is understood as equally important. So then they might be playing a little bit more on the power balance. And when we do the selection process for the programs, that's an element that we take into consideration, how the partners relate to each other, how they see each other, and how they value what each other brings to the table. So that for me will be a very important good practice. And the other one I was going to say, I think just to echo the enough time for the adaptation to happen. It's really, really important. I have heard lots of stories with organizations that we supported of donors really putting pressure for things to happen in 6 months or even a year. And it takes time. So if you look at the ADAPT framework, like you need to engage the local community, you need to go, understand, test, refine. And you need time to do that. So I can't stress enough how important it is to allow time, because if you do it quickly, it might not work well, but not because it was not the right program or the right partners or the right context. So you can have all these elements in place, but if you need to rush the adaptation, it might not work well.
Thank you so much, Laura. I mean, again, echoing what Nesna has spoken about, the importance of time, and also the risks that if we rush things, we may not be giving enough attention or credence to an effective program that may end up not turning out as well as it had hoped. And that's something we'd never want to do. But I also like that you talk about the importance of power. And I think we need to be thinking around power in our partnerships and how we work to ensure that the partnerships are, as you talk about, balanced. And this is really important when one partner is working with another partner on adaptation. So thank you, Laura, for those really great contributions and for your kind words on the adaptation guide. I'm now going to turn to you, Clara, to talk and reflect on some of your experiences of effective and ethical adaptation and why you think they've been so successful.
Thank you so much, Liz, and also congratulations, Vandana. I'm already a fan. I have my guide there after I learned in the SPRI workshop, and I found it, super useful. So I wanted to build on Laura's point because it's another critical good practice, but emphasizing how important it is for, in our experience at Equimundo, it has been, and working with partners for both effective design and implementation to really build these solid and collaborative partnerships based on mutual respect and trust between organizations that also share common principles and goals. And this might seem obvious, but there's a lot of nuances. And so sharing a mission among organizations to really advance gender equality and power balance relationships, both among them, but also through their programs, is is key and allows both partners to work together through the different phases of adaptation. In this case, I'm thinking of couples of fatherhood programs that have been adapted over 20 countries. But if I think of like the most effective partnerships and programs, it has been where those solid partnerships have been established through long-term collaboration that started even before the adaptation, and that then allowed for this co-design, co-development of culturally responsive curriculum content and methodologies. And so this, of course, requires investing very intentionally time and resources to build these partnerships. This many times is kind of invisible work, but it does require time for partners to discuss values alignment and different perspectives concerning what are some of these central principles that guide the practice. For partners to really prioritize engaging in these processes and supporting interventions that center on questioning harmful gender norms and following do no harm approaches. Because at Equimundo, at the center of our work is engaging men and boys for gender equality alongside women, it is much more important and that we really do this in ways that prioritize women's safety and concern, and so that this is clear when we work among partners. So what we've learned in some of the most successful adaptations, like in Lebanon or Rwanda, is we've mentioned sufficient time, but this means around maybe a year and a half, and really align everybody and staff from management to all the staff that will be involved in the program to be on board, to provide them opportunities to directly reflect on their own attitudes related to gender roles, power, and violence, create spaces for staff and management, and those that maybe have little experience on working with men to really understand both the value, but also interrogating their assumptions and concerns about working with men as fathers or caregivers. Key is to engage the staff and program facilitators in reviewing the existing program. They can identify opportunities and entry points for strengthening the focus and make it more relevant and resonate with communities. I won't go into details. I think the time is up, but I will emphasize this planning for a long-term and iterative learning process of adaptation, which means a lot of like piloting and refining the adapted curriculum before rolling it out. And we can talk more about this if we have time then. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Clara. I think we've got a golden thread running through all our responses around the importance of power and partnerships, the importance of building trust, continuous and iterative learning, which Clara didn't have enough time to go into, but I think it's been brought up previously. And to all our funding partners out there, the importance of time and resources and how long this takes, and we need to dedicate that time. Now over to you, Diana. What can you add to this incredibly rich discussion?
Yes, that's a hard question, Liz. Thank you. But how about I tell you all the story of how the World Bank actually approached one adaptation process that it was able to do. As you know, we have the opportunity to work with client governments. And so in this case, we had the opportunity to work with the government of Ecuador. And the government of Ecuador really wanted to empower women economically and amongst indigenous communities. But we at the bank were able to have discussions with the government to say, well, it would be great if we recognize that intimate partner violence is happening in this community. And if you want to economically empower women, you should also try to find an intervention that where we can add plus components that would address also the intimate partner violence that these women may be experiencing at home. They wanted to do this in indigenous communities, and we said, yes, fantastic. Our programs run a 5-year cycle. So right away, we started thinking, okay, we have 5 years to identify an intervention of economic empowerment with plus components that might be successful to addressing IPV. We have to adapt it in a way that's participatory in indigenous communities, and then we have to pilot it, and then we have to implement it. We have 5-year cycles. We felt a little constrained, even with that 5-year timeline, just to achieve a proper adaptation, and then a proper implementation of a pilot, and then a proper kind of scale up within the Indigenous community. So when we talk about time, I really kind of encourage us to think about really how much time we're talking about. And it can be done, but it is a longer term investment. So what we started with was really an evidence review of economic empowerment interventions, but really trying to find if the literature had documented any interventions working with Indigenous women. So starting kind of from the evidence base, what do we know about effective interventions and what are we going to present to this Indigenous community? So we did that, and I'm going to share the link of the evidence review in the chat. But we also wanted to take these interventions to the community to see how they resonated with them. So one of the things that we did was we hired an Indigenous women's leader to be a consultant and to help us guide the work on adaptation and consultation with the communities, making sure that we safely and ethically were able to touch upon different stakeholders within the community to understand what their reactions and perceptions were of these interventions that we narrowed down to. We also hired, alongside the Indigenous woman who had been working in women's issues for several years and really knew the community well, a GBV expert in Latin America that had the expertise to understand which were the core elements of the interventions that we were trying to retain, explain, and really wanted to get feedback from. So we paired those together, and this GBV expert had worked in adaptation of interventions in Indigenous communities in a different country, but very close by in Colombia. And so it was a Colombia GBV expert and an Indigenous woman from the local community. So after that, that team guided us through a series of consultations with Indigenous community, dividing up the group with stakeholders. And we really wanted to get a sense through those consultations of what, if anything, did the Indigenous community have a strong feeling to changing or that it might not fit in, and really identify if that they were speaking of those core elements of the intervention before we moved forward with an adaptation and a selection of an intervention. So sometimes even selecting the intervention to implement into a community, I would say we have to advocate for that to happen in a participatory way, right? And not really come into communities and say, okay, we're going to adapt to this community, this intervention. I think we have, fortunately, now some flexibility in choosing appropriate interventions for different communities. So we really invested in that learning, and this allowed us to see if we can move forward with the adaptation. Fortunately, we did find a way to move forward, and we're still in that process right now of adapting, and this has taken considerable time and money and resources, but the good thing is that we are doing it alongside the government. So the government is learning from us this process of investment and really tying it to the project development objectives of economically empowering women, right? Which is what they want. But helping them understand the intersection between intimate partner violence and economic empowerment, and the carefulness that we have to have when bringing an intervention that hasn't been implemented in an Indigenous community in the region to the Indigenous community, really all to ensure the success of the intervention and the success of the investment that the government is making. So that's a quick story of how we've done one adaptation that we're still in the process of doing in Ecuador with Indigenous communities. And I hope that added a little. And I should say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I was the only one that didn't congratulate you, Liz and Vandana and the whole team, Jennifer, for such an amazing resource. Thank you so much, because we wish we would have had this guide to talk to the government and be like, see, we're not making it up. These are the steps, but now we have it. So thank you so much.
Diana, thank you. And thank you for bringing all the kind of comments and thoughts to life through a story. And we hold this space. We look forward to seeing what comes out at the end of the journey. Of course, these journeys are ongoing and continuous. We have 10 minutes left, and we have one more question. And I would really like to ask this question because it's a very important one. It's about you know, when we were interviewing people's stories and learning on IPV program adaptations to inform the guide, we learned about that people had many challenges that they had to overcome through the course of an adaptation. And I'm going to ask each panelist to sort of share briefly one or two challenges that they encountered and how they were overcome. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm sorry about time, if you could focus in and try and just respond within 2 minutes. So first of all, I'm going to ask Laura to jump in. 1 or 2 minutes, what are some of the challenges that you experienced and how did they get addressed?
Okay. Thanks, Liz. So I'm going to share one that goes very aligned with the design phase from the ADAPT framework. So even when the partners are already working well together, and we had an example of a program being adapted from Brazil to Cape Verde in West Africa, both countries colonized by Portugal. So they felt they had lots of similarities because of that. But then when they started to work together to design, they realized that the originator had a lot of misconceptions about how feminism and racism manifested in Cape Verde. And so they found out when we did a very early stage field visit, it was really critical to talking to people there to understand that what they thought it to be the reality, it wasn't the reality, and that will influence a lot who will be involved in the adaptation, how some of the content will be shared. And what they did an incredible series of learning, weekly sessions with experts in racism, feminism from both countries. So both partners were very well educated and understanding in depth the realities and the differences to be able to do the program adaptation. So I think really not going with any misconceptions, even when there are some cultural or historic similarities between the partners. And one very quick one is being clear from the beginning on which are the stakeholders at the local level that need to be engaged, don't leave it to the end. So we had situations where the government needed to be involved from the beginning and they were not. And then when you think about the sustainability, how we're going to continue to work together after the pilot phase or in scaling up, if you don't have the right stakeholders, being civil society organizations, government, whoever they might be, not to jeopardize all the work that's being done. And then you get to the point where you need to get the stakeholder engaged to be able to do the next phase. They are not part of the conversation. So I think that's a challenge we have seen working. And when we have those buy-in from the get-go, everything goes much more smoothly.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, absolutely. Things do go much more smoothly when you have the buy-in and thinking about that up front. Natsnet, what are some of your biggest challenges that you might have experienced and how you overcame them? And Laura, thanks for sticking to time. You're awesome.
Thank you, Liz. I think our biggest and complex challenge is a lack of fidelity to the approach, meaning like the 4 essential elements being compromised and diluted in the adaptation process. And this could be cause of so many factors, but the most common challenges are related to the program duration, lack of funding, and then lack of or limited familiarity and understanding of the approach. So we have some tips for some challenges, but some challenges remain as is. Like, for example, if it is a short program duration where the 4 phases are being squeezed to 1 year, we don't have any solution to that. I think that is something that has to be discouraged. But when it is lack of funding and it is manifesting as resources lacking to produce enough materials, we would really encourage partners to at least prioritize the materials that are used for community activities. And when it is about limited understanding, we are offering reviews of adaptation materials, and we also provide longer-term technical partnerships. So these are quick tips from our experience.
Powerful tips. Thank you, Natsnet. And again, short program duration, funding, familiarity with the local approaches and the understanding of the actual approach, and raising voices can provide technical assistance. Diana, what are some of your experiences of challenges that you would like to share?
Well, I just wanted to build on Natsanet's comments because, again, our work with governments, we present them with a suite of options, and many of them are fascinated and taken by the SASA approach and really want to implement that. The difficulties that we've had there are really conveying, even though early on, kind of 8 years ago, we tried to write a guide on how to adopt community-based approaches with essential steps so we could use to guide governments, and I'll put the link to that in the chat. We really have kind of difficulty convincing governments to make that longer term investment, sometimes in adaptation. So we worked with a federal government in Brazil, and they chose SASA. And then, later on in the project, they reassessed the goals of the whole project, the funding availability, and decided that they still wanted to go with SASA, but that they would hire someone to turn the whole program into a week-long training. And so really a difficulty in saying, well, that's really not what SASA is. We were able to count with Naznet's colleagues to kind of bring in and try to counsel the government on understanding what those core elements were and how they couldn't be condensed into a week-long training. Years of work could not be conveyed in 1 week of training. And unfortunately, as governments are autonomous, and they should be autonomous, and we can only support them and try to guide them in their decision making, they did go ahead and create a curriculum and implemented a curriculum. Obviously, it's not SASA that is inspired in SASA. We really even had to have several conversations for them to stop calling it SASA, like really encouraging them to be respectful, I would say, of those interventions and what they are, and not refer to what they're doing in an inappropriate way, and could have a negative impact on the intervention. That's one example. And then real quick, Liz, I don't know if I have enough time. We had another implementing partner, the UN, that implemented a program. I'm not going to say where, but it was also a SASA program, and it was in a humanitarian setting. We didn't really realize if they had done any adaptation to the humanitarian setting. And then they realized that women couldn't leave the home safely. So they did all the community mobilization parts only with men, and then reported back to us. So this is something that I wanted to highlight, just because as donors and as those that have the technical expertise, even when we're partnering with governments that are autonomous, we also have to monitor that adaptation and implementation process very closely to make sure that the elements of the core design are being kept, even though the intention was to keep them all, then they got diluted or dropped in the implementation. So there's a need for continuous monitoring of the implementation as well. Thanks.
Diana, thank you so much. Such a rich discussion, and I'm so sad that we're running out of time. But Clara, over to you for your final thoughts on this.
Okay, I'll try in 2 minutes. So this illustrates a lot of the things mentioned before, and this delicate balance to it Vandana was referring at the beginning, of finding the balance between fidelity and fit, right? Because I can think of one example where this was an adaptation of a program that, because it had already been adapted in other 3 countries in the same region, even if we followed a thoughtful adaptation, we co-designed the program with the originators, engaged with women and men in the community, and there was so resources to design, but not to pilot, and resources to do a randomized control trial. Never, never do that. This was 10 years ago, where we didn't even know like what the key core elements were. So some of the things that we adapted, because women and men mentioned, were aligned with their cultural modalities of learning and how they felt more comfortable, then might be the same kinds of things that undermined the impact of the program, right? So in that context, it was the key challenge was sustaining men's participation in a couples program. And so how it was overcome, well, facilitators resorted to all kinds of strategies to incentivize participation. They adjusted the possibility of doing sessions wherever men and their partners were, instead of like always holding the group sessions. But this means that then this could have probably compromised one of the core ingredients that had to do with group dynamics and social learning. So even if the program managed to reduce psychological IPV as reported by women, it did not transform many of the ingrained and gendered power dynamics. And I think it might have been because of this. So again, this balance between fidelity and fit is something that does require iterative testing, piloting, learning, revising. And in this case, that was not possible. So yeah, always advocating for that is key.
Thank you so much, Clara. I'm going to now start drawing this to a close. It's been incredible. And Clara, thank you for that really important last message around the importance of fidelity and fit, and also just echoing the importance of taking and walking the journey with our partners and ensuring that we monitor and evaluate as we go along. But first of all, I just want to thank you all. I want to thank Vandana and team for this great webinar. I want to thank Lisa for her wonderful opening remarks, Diana, Nasnet, Clara, Laura for generously and so openly sharing your experiences with us, and all the wonderful resources that you've shared in the chat. And to everybody that's on the call with us, we will share them online as well. Thank you to the interpreters, and thank you for Morma for organizing this great production. And just a few quick next steps. We're going to share the recording with all of you, and it will be uploaded to the SVR website. We have shared the links to the guidance, but just to let you know that the executive summary and framework is available in Spanish, French, and Arabic. And we really are going to hopefully share host a how-to of conducting IPV program adaptations webinar in more detail. Vandana and I will strategize around that and bring that offering to you as soon as we can. And we're going to please, this is an invitation to all of you to come to S4O Forum, because we will host an intensive in-person workshop during the S4O Forum in October 2024 in Cape Town. Join us there and sign up for the workshop. And of course, do not hesitate to reach out to any one of us on this call. You can see the richness of expertise and knowledge on adaptation and scale up. If you want to explore new collaborations or evidence generation of IPV program adaptation, Vandana will share her email in the chat. And if you want to just talk to us around anything, please email the SVRI or myself with any questions, comments, and ideas on where we should be moving forward on adaptation. Again, thank you so much. The most amazing webinar. And I really, really hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're only 3 minutes late, so thank you for that too. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank
Thanks
you
for inviting us.
Bye.